Now, PSSR though, my goodness, it completely changes the image, and it just resolves so much more detail and cleans up so much noise, and it winds up massively improving the visuals overall, I would say. In what was a somewhat dirty looking game at times, it makes it look super smooth and clean, and it is a gigantic leap. It's probably the best implementation I've seen yet, just in terms of improving overall image quality maybe, and stability. Stability is key. It's temporally stable now, whereas before it was not. Which is why the Pro Max mode, as they call it, taking one from Apple perhaps, is so strange. That one, with high frame rate mode engaged anyway, limits itself to 50 frames per second.
The PS5 Pro is a fantastic piece of hardware for most players. If you've got a 4K TV and want smoother performance, it's a solid upgrade. The issues we're seeing with PSSR or third-party games are real, but they're not the whole story. For every Alan Wake 2 that stumbles, there's a Gran Turismo 7 or Spider-Man 2 that knocks it out of the park. So, yeah, the sentiment around the PS5 Pro might feel mixed if you're focusing on forums or Digital Foundry's nitpicks. But for the average player, it's delivering what it promised, a better experience for both current and upcoming games. The bigger question isn't whether the PS5 Pro is worth it, it's whether developers can catch up and consistently deliver games that show off its full potential. So here's the deal with NVIDIA's DLSS. It's one of those tech stories where they started with a great idea, totally fumbled the execution at first, but then somehow turned it into something incredible. DLSS, or Deep Learning Super Sampling, was first introduced back in 2018 alongside NVIDIA's RTX 20 series graphics cards. The whole idea was to use AI to upscale a lower resolution image into a higher resolution one in real time. That way, you could get better performance without sacrificing visual quality, at least in theory. It was meant to offset the massive performance hit that came with ray tracing, which was also a brand new thing at the time. But when DLSS first dropped, it was kind of a mess. The visuals were blurry, the image looked worse than just running the game at native resolution, and only a few games even supported it. When it worked, it wasn't consistent, and it felt more like a cool tech demo than something practical. Gamers weren't buying the hype, and a lot of people saw it as NVIDIA trying to push something that wasn't ready. Fast forward a couple of years though, and that's when things got interesting. NVIDIA released DLSS 2.0 in 2020, and it was a massive improvement. Suddenly, the visuals looked sharper, sometimes even better than native resolution, and the performance boost was real. They also made it easier for game developers to implement DLSS, so it started popping up in more games. That's when people stopped rolling their eyes at DLSS and started paying attention. These days, with DLSS 3 and all the updates they've rolled out, it's actually a huge deal. They've even added frame generation, which uses AI to create new frames between the ones your GPU renders, giving you even smoother gameplay. Sure, it's not perfect. Frame generation can add a bit of latency, which might not be great for competitive gaming, but for single-player games or visually intense stuff, it's a game changer. Sony's PS5 Pro arrived earlier this month, promising cutting-edge visuals, improved performance, and the introduction of its proprietary PSSR. However, early feedback suggests that the PS5 Pro may be falling short of its lofty promises. A peculiar, shimmering visual artifact noted across multiple games, including first-party exclusives, has raised concerns about the effectiveness of Sony's PSSR technology. The first reports of the issue appeared on popular gaming forums like Reset Era, where user Chaystick shared their experience. I love my PS5 Pro for the most part. Most games look wonderful, but there's this weird, shimmering, aliasing, whatever you want to call it. I thought my Pro was faulty, but it turns out I'm not the only one who noticed it. This shimmering artifact is most noticeable in titles utilizing ray tracing or featuring dense foliage, leading to visual distractions in scenes that should showcase the Pro's enhanced capabilities. The most alarming case of PSSR's shortcomings has surfaced with Star Wars Jedi Survivor. A recent analysis by Digital Foundry revealed that the game performs worse on the PS5 Pro than on the base PS5 when using Sony's upscaling solution. EA has publicly acknowledged the problem. We're aware of issues with Survivor on PlayStation 5 Pro and are actively investigating. Even the game's quality mode, meant to prioritize visuals, suffers from unstable frame rates and visual artifacts, suggesting systemic issues with PSSR. Not all games have struggled with the new hardware. Many players report excellent experiences with titles like Marvel's Spider-Man 2 and Call of Duty Black Ops 6, which take advantage of the Pro's power without significant visual visual artifacts. As developers gain more experience with PSSR, these issues could diminish over time. Have you noticed any visual artifacts on your PS5 Pro? Where things get interesting is how PSSR handles less complex rendering scenarios. When the game isn't pushing insane graphics or super heavy effects like ray tracing, PSSR can look really impressive. Take something like Spider-Man 2 or Ratchet & Clank. The reflections, the textures, everything looks polished and almost native to a 4K resolution. It's like magic when it works. Even in simpler games like The Last of Us Part 1, you get this clean, high-quality image that makes you go, yeah, this is what next-gen gaming should look like. But where it falls short is when things get more demanding. Games like Silent Hill 2, Jedi Survivor, or Alan Wake 2, they push PSSR harder, and the cracks start to show. You get weird noise in reflections, image quality that feels off, and sometimes you just wonder, did anyone test this properly before shipping it? It's like the tech isn't holding on to the visual data long enough. So static images look noisy or just plain rough. And let's not even get started on lower resolution input. If a game is rendering at, say, 1080p or lower and relying on PSSR to upscale, the results can range from passable to, what the heck happened here? Now here's where it gets even trickier. The way PSSR performs seems to depend heavily on how the developers integrate it. But here's why I'm optimistic. First, this is just the beginning. Sony is dipping its toes into machine learning-based upscaling, and this is uncharted territory for them. If you look at other similar technologies like NVIDIA's DLSS, the first versions weren't perfect either. They improved massively over time, and I think PSSR will follow a similar path. Developers are already figuring out how to better integrate it, and Sony is likely learning a ton from all these early implementations.
I think they might have achieved arguably just about the best image quality I've seen in a console game. When you consider the density of the visuals, how much detail is in them, the way it resolves that detail and presents it is so clean and attractive that it's honestly mind-boggling. It feels like you're playing a high-end PC game now, using everything that you could throw at it from the PC side. And yeah, I would say of all the titles we tested, this is the one that has the best image quality overall.
Let me tell you about Stellar Blade on the PS5 Pro. It's honestly where PSSR really starts to show off what it can do. When the game first dropped earlier this year, it was already impressive. The action, slick. The visuals, gorgeous. The soundtrack, absolutely killer. But it wasn't perfect, especially when it came to image quality and performance. So naturally, I was curious about how the PS5 Pro patch would change things. And let me tell you, it's a simple but effective upgrade that elevates an already great game. The big change comes down to the two new graphics modes introduced specifically for the PS5 Pro and Pro Max. Let's talk about Pro Max first. It basically takes the original quality mode, removes the 30 frames per second cap, and lets the game stretch its legs a bit. If you're using a VRR display, the unlocked frame rate makes it a much better experience than that old choppy 30 FPS. But where things get really interesting is the Pro mode, which leverages PSSR. Here's where you'll see the biggest improvement in image quality. It's cleaner, more stable, and just sharper overall. Fine details that used to shimmer or blur out now hold steady, and textures and edges look much more polished. It's the kind of upgrade that feels subtle at first but becomes hard to unsee once you compare it side by side. For example, let's take a look at something as simple as Eve's hair in the game. In the original performance mode, it's a shimmering mess, full of artifacts that just ruin the look. Switch to Pro mode, and suddenly it's clean, stable, and way more natural. Transparency effects, like looking through a tarp or dealing with light flares, also handle much better in PSSR. Sure, there are a few quirks, like some extra flicker in sun flares, but overall, the trade-offs are minimal compared to what you gain. Now, let's not forget performance. In the original game, only the performance mode could reliably hit 60 frames per second, and even then, it sacrificed a lot in image quality. On the PS5 Pro, balanced and performance modes now hit 60 frames per second with ease, which is nice. But Pro mode doesn't just match that, it improves on it. You're getting a near-perfect 60 frames per second experience with improved visuals, and if you toggle the high frame rate option, it gets even better. This unlocks 120 Hz output, which reduces input lag and makes dodging and blocking during combat feel snappier. And while Pro Max mode lets you play at native 4K, it struggles to hold 60 frames per second consistently. The Pro mode even raises the frame rate cap to 80 frames per second, which might not sound like a huge jump, but it feels noticeably smoother in practice. That combination of improved image quality, better responsiveness, and smoother action perfection makes it my favorite way to play the game now. Even the cutscenes, capped at 60 frames per second, don't feel like a deal breaker here. What's impressive about Stellar Blade is that it shows how PSSR should be done. Digital Foundry's Richard Leadbetter. If you're going to skip PS5 Pro but will likely get a PS6, the arrival of an enhanced machine is likely very good news for you. Looking at the criticisms of PS5 Pro today, I am reminded of the massive backlash against NVIDIA's RTX 20 series products based on the Turing architecture back in 2018. The products were pricey, nobody bought into the AI narrative, ray tracing was derided, and yet today, DLSS upscaling has proven to be one of the most transformative technologies in the PC space, a desired feature for users and coveted by the competition. Ray tracing? With smart technological innovations, an immense level of investment in software like Restire, and strategic partnerships with key game makers, NVIDIA brought actual path tracing to AAA games. Sony has taken the smart path here, delivering the custom silicon required where AMD did not seem to have any, while at the same time, developing PSSR on the software side. We've now been eyes-on with PSSR across a range of games, and while there's still work to be done in improving it, it's a big leap beyond existing upscaling solutions. But we shouldn't forget that the machine learning hardware isn't just a fixed-function AI upscaling block. It can be used for all manner of tasks. PSSR delivers the biggest bang for the buck, but it's just the beginning. We are looking at such a big change here that absolutely we should be looking at PlayStation 5 Pro as the console that sets the ball rolling for Sony in an area of crucial importance. I'd even venture to suggest that PlayStation 6 may even need PlayStation 5 Pro to exist for this evolution to happen. Sony's technology groups need time to develop technologies like PSSR and to ship them and to refine them. Meanwhile, developers need to grow accustomed to these technologies, instead of simply focusing on them for their PC games. We've now seen enough of the machine to say with some level of conviction that it does what Sony says it does. But more than that, with titles like F124, there's evidence that those that target the hardware specifically will see much bigger boosts than simply fidelity mode at 60 FPS. PS5 Pro doesn't answer the value question conclusively, not yet, but it's delivering clearly superior results to base hardware. More holistically though, today's added enhancements may well be laying the foundation work for the viability of 10th generation console hardware, and in that sense, its importance shouldn't be underestimated. Here's my 2 cents. If you're happy with the base PS5's image quality, the PS5 Pro probably isn't for you. But for those of us who want sharper visuals and smoother performance, especially in games where the standard PS5 struggles in performance modes, the Pro is a meaningful upgrade. A lot of PS5 games look solid, some even fantastic, but there are still plenty that fall short, particularly in demanding single-player games where image quality can feel lacking at 60 frames per second. That's where the Pro shines, giving those who care enough the option to invest in a better experience without moving to a high-end PC.
Part of it is because the improvement in detail is quite outrageous, but also because it's delivering a very crisp, very sharp 4K image out of a base resolution that's like not super high. So it's like 1152p, 1224p-ish internally. It's doing that in the game with a pretty zoomed out third-person camera, a lot of action, and it's giving you a perfect rendition of action scenes with a lot of complex movement and particles. But it's not perfect, I would say. You can have some problems with specular aliasing. It can blur patches of foliage when you're just walking by. It can have some issues with foliage where it kind of appears overly noisy. Even on opaque edges, it's not 100% stable. It's not as stable as the old 4K mode in the graphics mode on the PlayStation 5 console. But it is a huge improvement. It is absolutely a huge improvement, and it is absolutely one of the best titles in that respect on PlayStation 5.
If you want to be ahead of all the gaming leaks and news, specifically PlayStation news, time for you to subscribe. And as always, a like on the video is very much appreciated.